Week 12 of the fantasy football season. Trade deadlines up in some fantasy leagues and coming up in the next few weeks. Here's a few plays I look to buy and trade for this week. The first guy, Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. Derrick Henry, it's been an up and down season for him, and coming into the year, a lot of people thought the decline was on the way. We're one of the worst offensive lines in the league, and Derrick Henry up there, 28, 29 years old, where at that time a lot of running backs lose some speed and lose a step. Obviously, he's an elite running back. So the last few weeks, Derrick Henry really hasn't done much. This Tennessee Titan team, they've been trailing early and often, where teams have loaded the box and tried to make the rookie Will Levis beat him. So the last few weeks here for Henry, week 10 at Tampa Bay, 11 carries, 24 yards, a catch, -4 yards. In week 11 at Jacksonville, only 10 carries in that one, 38 rush yards, a catch, 6 yards. So week 12, good matchup coming up versus the Panthers, second most fantasy points to backs. In week 13 versus Indianapolis, fifth most fantasy points to backs, where obviously a division rival is the Colts, and a team that he's owned throughout his career is Derrick Henry. So right now with two nice games coming up in the next few weeks, and Henry's struggle in the last 2 weeks, he's a perfect buy low candidate because I still believe he could put up top 15, top 20 numbers at worst at the running back position. That obviously he's had a lot of problems this season with injuries and just guys underperforming. The next player, Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. The Jets, will see if they go to a permanent quarterback switch to either Tim Boyle, who came in that game in week 11 at the Bills, or they go to Trevor Siemian, the veteran quarterback. Garrett Wilson, he didn't do anything in that game. 2 catches, 9 yards, and a fumble loss. So Garrett Wilson, he's been trying his best, obviously, with Zach Wilson, one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, and his ceiling pretty much has been 17, 18 fantasy points with Zach at quarterback. Now Black Friday, first Black Friday game ever between them and the Miami Dolphins, and the Dolphins do give up the 12th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. But after a bad game like that for Wilson, like I said, we only had 0.90 fantasy points in PPR leagues. This is a perfect time for owners to go out there and get him, because I believe if the Jets do make a quarterback change, it can't be any worse than Zach Wilson, and Garrett Wilson could start having bigger ball games. So right now, coming off a poor game and possibly a quarterback change where his value bumps up, this is a perfect time to buy him low after a bad performance like this. Next play is Josh Jacobs of Las Vegas Raiders. So Josh Jacobs, it's been an up and down season for him. We know he signed the franchise tag, and a lot of people think some of these players that signed the franchise tag aren't going to go out there and risk it towards the end of the season. But the last 2 weeks, the numbers have gone down for Jacobs. Week 10 versus Jets in that one, 27 carries, 116 rush yards, 2 catches, 11 yards, a fumble loss. In week 11 in Miami, he really didn't do much in that ball game. Was Josh Jacobs, 14 carries, 39 yards, a catch for 12 yards. Jacobs, the catches have gone down over the last few weeks. I know week 10 he went over 100 yards versus a tough New York Jet defense, but Josh Jacobs still was drafted as a running back in the second, third round as your number 1 or 2 running back. So right now, well, he struggled over the last few weeks, and it's been an up and down season compared to last season where he was one of the best players in fantasy football. This is a perfect time to buy in week 12. He's got Kansas City, then a bye, and then some easier matchups coming up from week 14 to week 17. The next player I look to buy and trade for, Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. Jalen Waddle, it's been a pretty down season for Waddle after last year. 75 catches and over 1,300 yards. Where Waddle, he just hasn't been 100% healthy. And it's been the Tyreek Hill show and the running game for the most part for this Dolphin team. I know Waddle's had a couple decent games, but the last few weeks we really haven't seen much out of him. Week 9 in Germany versus Kansas City, a carry, 12 yards, 3 catches, 42 yards. In week 11 versus the Vegas Raiders, 4 catches, 55 yards. I know Jalen Waddle's not 100%, but I also know he's a big play wide receiver, and he has game-breaking ability where he could take a slant 80 yards to the end zone, or be a guy that could be a matchup problem all day. So right now, he's just not getting anything going. You think he would, obviously, with Tyreek Hill on the other side with rolled coverage towards his way and more one-on-ones. But right now, I think they're going to get back on the same page. I think things are going to get going here for Jalen Waddle and this Dolphin team. And after the last 2 weeks where he hasn't done much, he's a perfect buy low candidate. This week, the next play is Sam Laporta of the Detroit Lions. Sam Laporta, it's been a great rookie season, no doubt about it. But the last 2 weeks as well, he's struggled as Laporta. Maybe he's hitting the rookie wall a little bit. Week 10 at the Chargers in a cupcake matchup, he had a mid-game, 4 catches, 40 yards. In week 11 versus the Bears, 3 catches, 18 yards and a 2-point conversion. Week 12, a good matchup versus Green Bay. And week 13 in New Orleans, that give up the 10th most fantasy points to tight ends on the season. So in my opinion, he's still the number 2 option in this passing attack behind Amon-Ra St. Brown is Sam Laporta. We know he's a matchup problem for safeties and linebackers, whatever opposing defenses try to put on him, and he works the seam of the field. But Jared Goff, the last few weeks, the turnovers have gone up a little bit, but Sam Laporta, for the most part, he's been a double-digit tight end all season, but the last few weeks, like I said, the numbers have gone down and teams have rolled coverage his way a little bit more. But right now, with the numbers down and maybe hitting the rookie wall just a bit, I think Laporta could get back on the right track with an easier schedule up, and he's a buy low play this week. The next guy is Diontae Johnson of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Johnson, we know he was out early in the season, and then he came back a few weeks ago was Diontae Johnson and had solid 3 games in a row, but the last 2 weeks, he's pretty much been non-existent for fantasy owners. Week 10 versus Green Bay, a catch, 17 yards. In Week 11 in Cleveland, 2 catches, 16 yards. Week 12 at Cincinnati, and Week 13 versus Arizona, decent matchups coming up. We know he's one of the better possession wide receivers in the league. And this offense, they just got to simplify things, in my opinion, to get the football to their players better. George Pickens hasn't done much. Diontae Johnson the last 2 weeks hasn't done much, and Kenny Pickett, I know, isn't that good of a quarterback, but they got to find ways to get Johnson the football, and I think after the last 2 weeks of him doing nothing, they're going to find ways is this Pittsburgh Steelers team. So right now, while his numbers have hit rock bottom, he's a perfect buy low this week, and the final player I look to buy and trade for is Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. Terry McLaurin, we know he's a big play wide receiver and one of the most underrated wide receivers in the league. In my opinion, is Scary Terry. Each and every season, he puts up solid number 2 wide receiver numbers for fantasy owners. 2 weeks for him as well, single-digit fantasy games in PPR leagues. Week 10 at Seattle, 4 catches, 33 yards. And Week 11 versus the Giants, 5 catches, 43 yards. So Week 12, a tougher matchup, no doubt about it, at the Cowboys. They give up the second least amount of fantasy points to receivers on the season. Then he's got a good matchup versus Miami in Week 13, so him and Sam Howell have had a good rapport for the most season. On the year, he's had some big games, is Terry McLaurin, where he's scoring from that 13 to 16-point range. I know his best game's only 22 fantasy points this season in PPR leagues, but like I said, each and every year you pencil him in for pretty much number 2 wide receiver production and 1,000-yard receiver. And once again this season, I think he's going to get things going as crunch time comes up. So that's a few plays I look to buy and trade for Week 12 of the fantasy football season.